November 8th is Election Day in America, and if you didn't cast an absentee or early vote in your state, then you only have a few days left to choose who you want to vote for in the 2016 presidential race. Plenty of information exists online about the candidates, but it's a lot to sift through. A good starting point would be the televised presidential debates. They cover many of the most controversial and popular issues from the campaign season and present the candidates' arguments in a way that's easy to compare. There's only one problem. Each debate is hours long. The last one alone took 2 hours. Ain't nobody got time for that. So Tell It Simply created a video series that summarizes the debates, so you can remember what happened, move on to some other articles, and still have time to spare. Starting our list is the first presidential debate. Ready? Set? The two candidates at the debate were the Republican Party's nominee, Donald Trump, and the Democratic Party's nominee, Hillary Clinton. The moderator for this debate was Lester Holt, who is an American journalist and anchors the weekday edition of NBC Nightly News. Holt chose the questions that guided the debate and divided them into 3 sections, which he named Achieving Prosperity, America's Direction, and Securing America. These titles were just catchy substitutes for economic policy, social policy, and foreign affairs. Within those sections, Holt presented 2 questions, or segments, which focused on specific issues that he believed would interest viewers. He also asked the candidates to address recent challenges to their credibility and whether they would accept the election's outcome if their opponent won. Here's the tricky bit, though. The candidates gave initial statements for each question, which would be a lot to cover on its own, but they also scrutinized each other's arguments, informal rebuttals, and unsolicited crosstalk. With so few questions to answer, compared to later debates, the candidates focused on establishing their policy positions and credibility. Both candidates claimed that they would accept the election's outcome if they lost, but Trump doubted Clinton's sincerity. Now, I'm sure that you want to know what the candidates said about their policy. So here's how we're going to tackle it. We're going to take each policy area in order: economic policy, social policy, and foreign affairs. We're going to tell you the values, goals, and campaign promises stated by each candidate. Values are what candidates believe to be true about America. Goals are what the candidates believe America should do now. And campaign promises are what candidates promise to do if they are elected president. Then, we'll tell you what their opponents said, all their concerns and criticisms. Credibility was a large beast that reappeared over and over across the debate, so we'll tackle that last. And note, we don't fact-check the candidates or explain the scandals that they reference. If you're watching on our website or on YouTube, check the show notes for timestamps so you can skip to what you're most interested in. You can also see the report that we based our videos on at our website. Now, to the candidates. Clinton views wealth inequality as America's greatest economic hurdle. She believes that if middle and working class Americans could capture more of our nation's economic gains, then our economy would improve overall. She disagrees with Trump's beliefs about international trade, and she also believes that our wealth inequality resulted from the shrewd maneuvering of especially wealthy Americans. In order to tackle this wealth inequality, Clinton recommends that America improve its jobs for middle-class Americans. 3 of her 4 specific recommendations for improving these jobs involved increasing wages. She also recommends public and private investments into affordable childcare, reductions in college debt, and paid time off, including paid family leave and earned sick days. Aside from improving existing jobs, she also recommends that we double down on clean energy in order to improve our access to domestically generated energy and create new jobs. Her position on trade reform remains unclear. While she advocated for strategic trade deals when criticizing Trump's economic policy, she didn't clearly define what makes trade deals strategic or what America's goals should be for global trade. If elected president, Clinton promises to bring America closer to a growing, equitable economy. She will oversee new energy infrastructure development and the rollout of a new tax plan, which should create new jobs and slow wealth inequality. Despite giving only a general opinion on America's global trade, she did promise specific actions to enforce international trade deals more effectively. She may also introduce new federal wage legislation, given that she advocated for raising the national minimum wage. However, she did not say so explicitly.
Objection!
Trump agrees with Clinton that creating affordable childcare and other investments for middle and working class Americans are important goals. However, he disagrees with Clinton's proposed methods for achieving those goals. But he doesn't clarify the difference between how he and Clinton would undertake these challenges in either his goals or campaign promises. Trump also views Clinton's position on trade reforms and job creation with suspicion. He believes that Clinton would have introduced these solutions earlier in her career if her values, goals, and promises were at all credible. Trump strongly disagrees with Clinton's plan for tax reform and regulating wages. Her plan, he argues, would encourage offshoring and outsourcing by increasing taxes and unnecessary regulations on business operations. Finally, Trump believes that Clinton's promise to invest in solar panels is misguided. Now for Mr. Trump. In his economic policy, Trump points to the continued outsourcing of certain American jobs as our nation's greatest economic issue. He also identifies several other threats to America's economic stability, including ineffective trade deals, foreign currency devaluation, overregulation on business operations, money stranded overseas, inefficient military purchases, and about to rise federal interest rates. He favors tax cuts and worries about the decay of American infrastructure. He blames these issues on the inaction of politicians like his opponent, Clinton. In order to tackle the many complicated issues in our economy, Trump recommends that America focus its attention on ending the outsourcing of traditional blue-collar work. He advises that America simultaneously incentivize companies to return their offshore operations to the U.S. and expand the companies that already operate domestically. If elected president, Trump promises to accomplish what his predecessors failed to do, to act immediately on issues of outsourcing and business creation. He will renegotiate trade deals and reduce government regulations on business operations. His more specific promises revolve around tax reform, which would reduce financial barriers to starting and maintaining a business in America.
Objection!
Clinton strongly disagrees with Trump over what would happen as a result of his proposed tax reform. She claims that his plan would hurt the economy by increasing America's debt by $5 trillion, by disadvantaging some middle-class families, and by risking the loss of 3.5 million jobs and a new recession. She also doubts that it would actually repatriate money stranded overseas, though Trump reaffirmed later that it would. She likens his plan to trickle-down economics, which she argues has weakened America's economy and increased wealth inequality in our recent past. She harbors suspicions of Trump's intent, citing a conflict of interest in his proposal, a $4 billion tax benefit applicable to his family. Clinton views Trump's distrust of her and other political predecessors as unfounded and hypocritical. She claims that Trump supported and benefited from the housing crisis, which demonstrates his unwillingness to reform the economy when its problems benefit him. She also believes that the increase in incomes and manufacturing jobs in the 1990s demonstrate the weakness of his accusations. In her view, his blanket accusations of incompetence against former politicians, particularly against herself and her husband, are at best far-reaching, and at worst, blatantly false. Clinton extends this same scrutiny to Trump's arguments regarding trade regulations. She argues that his opinion of NAFTA is only that, an opinion, and that her extensive review of trade deals in the past debunks his accusations of inaction or bias against her. He also adds that she did not approve of the Trans-Pacific Partnership after it was negotiated, but she doesn't clarify if she disapproves of it for the same reasons as Trump. Clinton worries about the many unintended consequences of our criminal justice system. She believes that everyone, including police officers, struggle with implicit bias. She implies that this bias has enabled racial discrimination in community policing and permitted excessively severe mandatory minimum sentences. Clinton trusts that good police officers want criminal justice reform as much as their communities do, and she worries about their physical safety on the job. She identifies the abundance of privately owned military-style weapons and the mismanagement of individuals with mental health disorders as the largest threats to police officers nationally. To address these problems, Clinton advocates for comprehensive background checks on gun purchases and prohibitions on gun purchases by individuals on federal terrorist watch lists. She also believes that America should implement more second chance programs and offer more training and resources to police officers through the federal government. If elected, Clinton promises to push criminal justice reform forward by investing money from her first budget into retraining police officers on implicit bias. She also promises to end private prisons in the state system as in the federal system.
Objection!
Trump did not directly challenge Clinton's position on criminal justice reform. Instead, he dedicated his time to establishing and defending his own social policy. Since it differs from Clinton's policy, though, we can assume that it represents his issues with Clinton's plan. So, let's check it out. The rise of urban crime is Trump's primary concern. He believes that violent gangs, whose members are often illegal immigrants, plague American cities. He believes that urban crime hurt African Americans and Hispanics, and politicians, especially Democrats, never follow through with their campaign promises to reduce crime in these communities. He approves of stop-and-frisk policies because they effectively reduce murder rates by removing guns from felons and other violent people. He claims that the judicial ruling in New York City that declared stop-and-frisk unconstitutional would have been reversed had it been appealed, and that stop-and-frisk should not be unconstitutional. He agrees with Clinton that the federal government should provide more training and assistance to police officers. He also agrees with Clinton that individuals on terrorist watch lists should be restricted from purchasing guns, but only if those individuals truly deserve to be on those lists. Trump calls for America to reestablish law and order. He advocates for more police and better community relations. He also supports a review of America's no-fly-in watch lists in order to identify and legally remove individuals who are unjustifiably on those lists. Trump does not promise any specific actions as part of his social policy, but his rhetoric implies that he will help reestablish law and order in America.
Objection!
Clinton disagrees with Trump's call for law and order. She condemns his presentation of urban crime for being overly dire and neglectful of systemic racism. She also disagrees with Trump's attribution of declining crime rates to stop-and-frisk policies. Since crime rates continued to drop after the policies ended, she claims, factors other than stop-and-frisk must be causing the decline. While Trump later reasserted his confidence in stop-and-frisk's effectiveness, Clinton continued to doubt his claim. Clinton values America's reputation of dependability abroad. She believes that upholding our defense obligations to global allies maintains that positive reputation. So she values honoring our mutual defense treaties with nations like Japan and South Korea. She also believes that many foreign nations, including Russia, desire American public and private sector information. She perceives recent cyber attacks on American government offices and companies as attempts by these countries to test their boundaries with America in cyber warfare. Clinton believes that the only way to defend American citizens from this digital war is to demonstrate America's larger capacity to conduct cyber attacks on predatory nations. Clinton recommends that America confront ISIS, online and on the ground. She insists that America push ISIS out of Iraq and then pursue their factions in Syria. She advises an intelligence surge and increased efforts to disrupt ISIS propaganda online. If elected, Clinton promises to be a dependable leader who prevents foreign interference in American security and affairs. She will intensify airstrikes against ISIS and eventually support America's Arab and Kurdish partners to remove ISIS from Raqqa. She will also organize action in Baghdadi. Finally, she will work with American tech companies to interfere with ISIS online recruitment.
Objection!
Trump disapproves of Clinton's intentions to continue America's defense of foreign allies. He argues that America overpays to defend these nations who don't pay their fair share to defend themselves. He accuses Clinton of willingly perpetrating this inequality with her strategy. Trump also worries that Clinton's plan would continue America's disproportionately large payments to NATO, despite NATO's inaction on terrorism. Clinton defended by pointing to NATO's invocation of Article 5, the only one in history, after the 9/11 terrorist attacks against America. She implied that this example demonstrates NATO's value to America and disproves their alleged apathy to anti-American terrorism. Nevertheless, Trump asserted that it is not enough to justify the expense of continuing these defense relationships unreformed. Trump doubts that Russia conducted the recent cyber attacks on the Democratic National Commission. He warns that Clinton's confidence in her accusations against Russia ignores the possibilities that other nations like China or individual hackers organized the attacks. Regarding ISIS, Trump's criticisms of Clinton were numerous. He disapproves of how Clinton shared her plan to defeat ISIS online, believing that ISIS could access these public statements and develop countermeasures. In a near aside, he even speculated that General Douglas MacArthur would also disapprove of her decision. He believes that the poor results of prior collaborations with Muslim nations in combating terrorism undermine Clinton's optimism about future collaborations. Finally, he argues that Clinton's past record with ISIS evidences her incompetence in challenging them. He even blames Clinton and President Obama for allowing ISIS to form by removing American troops from Iraq and by leaving behind Libyan oil. Clinton defended in several statements, but across the board, their debate over her military strategy for ISIS deadlocked. Clinton denies that she has given ISIS too much information about her plans, but Trump reasserted that she has. Clinton denies responsibility for the removal of American troops in Iraq, attributing the agreement to George W. Bush, and blaming limitations from that agreement on negotiating changes. Trump reaffirmed, however, that Clinton and President Obama are actually to blame. Clinton used Iran as a counterexample to Trump's skepticism of Muslim nation collaborations, acknowledging our issues with Iran, but repeating her appreciation for the limitations on Iran's nuclear programs that our negotiations with them achieved. She also challenged Trump to come up with a better, or any, plan to defeat ISIS. To both of these challenges, Trump repeated his earlier condemnations. Trump perceives foreign nuclear attacks to be America's greatest security threat. He disapproves of enacting a nuclear first strike policy, and he believes that the international community must rid itself of nuclear weapons. Trump also believes that America has fallen behind Russia and other nations in updating its nuclear and military technology. Trump suspects that America has also fallen behind ISIS in cyber warfare. He claims that as ISIS spread to multiple countries, it became more difficult for us to fight them. Though he did not say so explicitly, he may view ISIS's cyber activity as one of the ways that ISIS spread its influence globally. Trump condemns the recent deal that Clinton and other politicians negotiated with Iran because it doesn't require Iran to confront North Korea, Yemen, or other problematic allies. Trump also believes that China could and should exercise more of its influence over North Korea to curb its neighbor's nuclear activity. These positions align with his general view that America invests too much in defending other nations while demanding too little from these countries. He predicts, for example, that the Iran deal will increase our risk of foreign nuclear attack. Not only could America demand assistance in combating anti-American terrorism and nuclear threats, Trump argues that America should also demand larger monetary contributions from its allies for their defense. Trump recommends that America pressure NATO and nations from the Middle East to join us in ending ISIS. He doesn't explicitly state any other goals or campaign promises, but his rhetoric on what he believes to be true about America's foreign affairs imply his belief that America needs to demand more from foreign nations and restore its militaristic advantage.
Objection!
Clinton contends that Trump lacks the diplomacy to resolve America's problems successfully. She claims that while he is quick to criticize our recent deal with Iran, he does so without offering a viable alternative for accessing Iranian nuclear facilities, ridiculing the compromise not because it could have been better, but because it was a compromise at all. Clinton also accuses Trump of being overly dismissive of collaborations with allies from Europe and the Middle East, even though it could advance our intelligence-gathering operations. Lastly, Clinton argues that Trump's constant insults of Muslims erode the willingness of Muslim-majority nations and American Muslims to help locate and combat ISIS. Phew, that was a lot. Now we're going to talk about the candidates' appeals to credibility. Let's look at the candidates one by one, starting with Hillary Clinton. My ideas on American economic policy are credible because my father was a small businessman, and I draw my respect for middle and working class Americans from having watched his work. As a senator, I evaluated trade deals fairly, increased American global exports by 30%, and increased American exports to China by 50%. Some Americans are concerned about my use of a private email server while handling messages related to my work as Secretary of State and with other government officials. My opponent says I'm not credible because I downplayed that scandal, even though my actions were unacceptable. When staff of mine took the Fifth Amendment during investigations of my actions in order to avoid prosecution, that was disgraceful. But in my defense, I have already acknowledged that my use of a private email server was a mistake, and have apologized for it. My ideas on American social policy are credible because I have met with a group of experienced police chiefs who agree with my arguments about implicit bias and who told me their concerns. But some Americans are concerned about my insinuations preceding the debate that police are implicitly biased against African Americans. According to my opponent, I'm also not credible because I use the word super predator when discussing African American youth. Because I secretly agree that stop and frisk effectively removes guns from gangs and violent people, but maintain a different opinion publicly for political reasons. Because Patty Solis Doyle said on CNN's Wolf Blitzer show that Blumenthal sent McClatchy, a respected reporter, to Kenya to investigate President Obama's birth certificate. Blumenthal works for my campaign, so I helped perpetuate the Obama birther scandal and failed to obtain his birth certificate through my investigations. And because I treated President Obama with terrible disrespect during my campaign for the 2008 Democratic presidential primary. My ideas on American foreign affairs are credible because I was involved in several campaigns to remove al-Qaeda leadership from power. Because as Secretary of State, I found Osama bin Laden and removed him from power. Because as a senator, I voted for every sanction enacted against Iran in response to their development of nuclear weapons facilities. And because as Secretary of State, I built a coalition with Russia and China that imposed tough sanctions on Iran and drove them to negotiate access to their nuclear weapons facilities. This example shows my competence at diplomacy and coalition building. Admittedly, some Americans are concerned about Trump's accusations that I lack a presidential look and stamina. My opponent says I'm not credible because I was totally out of control behind the blue screen at a recent event with the AFL-CIO, because I'm cavalier in how I talk about Russia and other countries, despite my concerns about foreign nuclear activity, because I don't have the business ability to say that America can't continue to defend foreign nations militaristically without increases in payments from those countries, because my experience with managing American foreign affairs is bad experience. Because I spent $200 million in attack ads against Trump, but the polls preceding this debate show that Trump is winning or Trump is tied with me, even though he has spent practically nothing. And because I lack the stamina to manage American foreign affairs. But in my defense, I have already traveled to 112 countries and negotiated peace deals, ceasefires, and releases of dissidents. I have also opened new opportunities in foreign nations worldwide, and have spent 11 hours testifying in front of a congressional committee. Trump hasn't done any of those things, so he doesn't have the authority to criticize my stamina in managing American foreign affairs. My ideas on American economic policy are credible because using only a small loan from my father in 1975, I built a real estate company worth many billions of dollars, built admirable structures across the world, and remained financially underleveraged. Because I filed a 104-page financial statement that shows my income for the past year as $694 million. And because under my guidance, the old post office on Pennsylvania Avenue was renovated under budget and ahead of schedule this year, demonstrating my competency in getting things done. Yes, some Americans are concerned about my unwillingness or inability to disclose my federal tax returns publicly. And yes, my opponent says I'm not credible because I often bait and switch when discussing challenges to my credibility, because I complain about the state of American infrastructure but avoid paying federal income taxes that would fund such improvements, because I champion small businesses but regularly refuse to pay contractors and laborers who work for me, because I claim to be a successful businessman but filed for bankruptcy 6 times when many other successful businessmen have never filed for bankruptcy. Because sometimes the skills from businesses don't transfer well into government and would instead be harmful. And because for about 40 years, every political candidate has released their federal tax returns. The financial disclosure statements that I release don't show my tax rate or other important details regarding my tax returns. I must be hiding my tax returns because they reveal something embarrassing or controversial, such as conflicts of interest, evidence that contradict my claims of charity or business success, or a record of avoiding federal taxes. But in my defense, you don't learn much more from federal tax returns than you do from my financial disclosure statements. And avoiding federal taxes makes me smart. I'm responsible to my family and company for avoiding taxes whenever it is legal to do so. Also, if I had paid federal income tax, politicians like Clinton would have squandered it anyway. And when I didn't pay contractors and workers, it was because I was unsatisfied with their work, or because it was legal. And tens of thousands of other people love working with me. My ideas on American social policy are credible because the Fraternal Order of Police endorsed me. I also have endorsements from almost every American police group. Because the National Rifle Association endorsed me. Because I successfully secured President Obama's birth certificate, which again demonstrates that I can get things done. And because I recently developed good relationships with African American communities. Some Americans are concerned about my skepticism of President Obama's American citizenship until September 2016. And according to my opponent, I'm also not credible because I began the Obama birther scandal. I challenged the legitimacy of Obama's American citizenship and demanded his complete birth certificate without evidence to support my accusations. I made these accusations solely to gain supporters in communities who were suspicious of President Obama's citizenship. Additionally, the Justice Department sued me in 1973 because I wouldn't rent apartments in one of my real estate developments to African Americans. I was sued by the Justice Department twice in my career for racial discrimination, and I ensured that my employees enforced my discriminatory policies. But in my defense, I settled that lawsuit without admission of guilt, which is amazing. Also, the Justice Department brought that lawsuit against many other real estate firms, not just mine. Also, I opened a club in Palm Beach, Florida, a tough, brilliant, and especially wealthy community. And that club does not discriminate against African Americans, against Muslims, or anyone else. I got a lot of credit for it, and I'm glad that it opened. My ideas on American foreign affairs are credible because over 200 American admirals and generals endorsed me, because the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency endorsed me, and have never before endorsed a candidate on immigration, because even though they won't credit me, NATO is now opening a major terror division because of my criticisms of them, and because I have a winning temperament and better judgment than Clinton. Some Americans are concerned about my support of America's war in Iraq. And my opponent says I'm also not credible because I invited Putin to hack American data servers, because 50 national security officials who served in Republican administrations accuse me of being unfit for the position of commander-in-chief, because I supported the invasion of Iraq, because I advocated for our government's actions in Libya and for the removal of Gaddafi after having done business with him, because I demonstrated my poor judgment when I said I would blow Iranian ships that taunt American sailors out of the water, which would start a war, because I have a cavalier attitude towards nuclear weapons. I have repeatedly said that I don't care if other nations like Japan, South Korea, and Saudi Arabia get nuclear weapons. I have also said that a nuclear war in East Asia would be fine. Because I am too easy to provoke to be given access to nuclear codes. And because I routinely insult women. I have called them pigs, slobs, and dogs. I called a Latina contestant in my beauty pageant Miss Piggy and Miss Housekeeping. I have said that pregnancy is an inconvenience to employers, and that women don't deserve equal pay unless they do as good a job as men. But in my defense, I did not support the war in Iraq, and Sean Hannity can attest to my disapproval of the invasion. Accusations that I supported the war are lies from mainstream media, orchestrated by Clinton. In reality, I predicted that the war would destabilize the Middle East. Because blowing Iranian ships that taunt American sailors out of the water would not start a war, and such action would be justified if they taunted us. Because Clinton's accusations that I said I would not care if other nations got nuclear weapons is false. And finally, her accusation that I'm too easily provoked to have access to nuclear weapons is old and inaccurate.